The sound of wood snapping echoed sharply in the darkness, followed by a heavy crash that shattered the stillness of the village night. And before anyone could react, baskets of fruit rolled violently across the ground, scattering in every direction as if something or someone had struck the stall with deliberate force. A shadow moved, fast, then disappeared. "Jack!" Tử Tien's voice broke through the silence as she rushed toward the market, her breath uneven, her feet barely feeling the ground beneath her as she ran, the cold night air cutting into her lungs, because she had heard it, that sound, and something deep inside her already knew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Jack was right behind her, his steps heavier but faster than ever, his heart pounding not from the run, but from the fear building with every second they got closer. When they arrived, they stopped. Both of them, frozen, because what stood in front of them was no longer a stall. It was destruction. The wooden table lay on its side, one leg broken clean off, baskets overturned, fruits crushed into the dirt, some split open, some buried in mud, others scattered far beyond reach like pieces of something that had been carefully built and violently torn apart. For a moment, no one spoke. Jack's eyes slowly scanned the scene. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and something inside him snapped quietly but completely. "This wasn't an accident," he said under his breath. Tử Tien stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up a fruit from the ground, brushing the dirt away instinctively even though it was already ruined. Her chest tightened. "This was on purpose." The words barely left her lips, but they didn't need to be louder, because Jack already knew. A faint sound of footsteps approached from behind, then another, then more. Villagers began to gather, drawn by the noise, their lanterns lighting up the dark, revealing more of the damage, more of the mess, more of the truth no one wanted to say out loud. What happened? Who did this? This just happened. Voices overlapped. Confused. Uneasy. Because this wasn't just damage. This was a message. Jack stood still for a few seconds longer. Then suddenly he moved. Quickly. Kneeling down, grabbing fruits from the ground, picking them up one by one, his movements fast but controlled. Like if he stopped for even a second, the anger inside him would explode into something worse. Tử Tien immediately knelt beside him, helping. Silently. The dirt stuck to their hands. The cold seeped into their skin. But neither of them stopped. Because fixing something, even when it couldn't be fully fixed, felt better than doing nothing. "Jack!" someone called out. He didn't respond. "Jack, do you know who did this?" That made him pause. Just for a second. His hand stopped midair, holding a bruised orange. Then slowly he looked up, and in his eyes, there was only one name. A Páo. The murmurs started immediately. "A Páo? You're sure? Did anyone see him?" Jack didn't answer, because he couldn't. Not without proof. And that was the worst part. Tử Tien glanced at him. She saw it. The certainty. The anger. The helplessness. But she also knew they couldn't act on suspicion alone. "We don't know yet," she said quietly, trying to steady the situation. But the tension didn't ease. Because everyone knew the history. Everyone knew the conflict. Now, this. Maybe it was just kids, someone suggested weakly. But no one really believed it. Not with damage like this. Not with the way the stall had been hit. Not with the timing. This wasn't random. Jack stood up slowly, his hands dirty, his breathing heavier now. He looked around. At the villagers. At the stall. At everything they had worked for. Ruined. Just like that. "I'll fix it," he said finally. Simple. Flat. But behind those words was something much deeper. Because this wasn't just about a stall anymore. Tử Tien stood up beside him. "We'll fix it," she corrected. Jack didn't look at her. But he nodded. The villagers began to help again just like before, picking up what they could, setting aside what was still usable, rebuilding piece by piece, slowly restoring what had been broken. But the atmosphere had changed. This time, there was unease, fear, whispers. Because if someone could do this once, they could do it again. From the edge of the crowd, unnoticed by most, a small figure stood still. A child. Quiet. Watching. Eyes wide. Focused not on the stall, but on the path leading into the darkness beyond the market. Because just moments before the crash, that child had seen something. Someone. A silhouette. Familiar. Leaving. In a hurry. The child hesitated, looking at Jack, then at the villagers, then back at the dark path. Fear. Doubt. Uncertainty. Because speaking up meant something. Back at the stall, Jack lifted the broken wooden leg of the table, testing it, his expression unreadable now, calmer on the surface, but beneath it, something was building. Slow. Heavy. Inevitable. Because even without proof, he already knew. And if it was really a Páo, then this was only the beginning. The broken stall stood there like a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding, even after the villagers helped lift it back into place, even after the scattered fruit had been gathered into baskets again, because no matter how much they tried to fix it, something had already changed in the air. Something tense, something watchful, something that made every shadow feel heavier than before. Jack tightened the rope around one of the wooden legs, testing it with his hand, his movements slower now, more deliberate, not because he was tired, but because his mind was no longer on the stall. It was somewhere else. On the path. In the dark. On that name. A Páo. Behind him, the murmurs hadn't stopped. They said they saw something. Who would do this? This isn't normal. Tử Tiên stood quietly listening, her hands still dusted with dirt, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching, not just for answers but for something more subtle. A reaction. A clue. Crack. But everyone looked the same. Concerned. Uneasy. Careful. Too careful. Jack. A small voice called out. Soft. Almost lost in the noise. He turned. So đi Tử Tiên. At the edge of the group stood a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, barefoot, holding tightly onto the sleeve of an older woman, eyes wide, uncertain, but clearly wanting to say something. Jack crouched down slowly, bringing himself to the child's level. What is it? He asked gently. The child hesitated, looked at the woman, then back at Jack. I saw someone, the child whispered. The entire space shifted instantly. Silence. Every voice stopped. Every eye turned. Jack's gaze sharpened. Who? The child swallowed, small fingers tightening. A Páo. The name fell into the silence like a stone. Heavy. Final. Irrefutable. A ripple spread through the crowd. What? Are you sure? You saw him? The child nodded quickly. He was there. Near the stall, and then he ran away. Jack didn't move. But something inside him locked into place. This time it wasn't just suspicion. It was truth. Tử Tiên stepped forward slightly. Her voice calm but firm. Did anyone else see? A few people exchanged glances. No one spoke immediately. Until, I heard a motorbike earlier, one man said. Another added, I saw someone heading toward the forest path. Piece by piece, the story formed, and with it, the mood changed. Because now it wasn't just an accusation. It was a pattern. Jack stood up slowly, his hands no longer shaking, his breathing steady, his eyes colder now, not out of rage, but clarity. So it was him, he said quietly. No one disagreed, but no one stepped forward either, because knowing something and acting on it were two very different things, especially when it involved a Páo. We should tell the Truong Ban, someone suggested. A pause, then silence again, because everyone knew that would lead nowhere. Páo wasn't just anyone. He was protected, and that protection was the real problem. Tử Tiên looked at Jack. She saw the shift, the decision forming behind his eyes. Jack, she said softly. He turned to her. I'm not letting this go, he said. Not loud, not emotional, but absolute. Before anyone could respond, a distant sound broke through the quiet. A motorbike, coming back. Slow, deliberate. Every head turned, every breath held. The engine grew louder, closer, until he appeared. A Páo, riding straight into the edge of the market, stopping just far enough to observe but close enough to be seen. His expression, unchanged, almost amused. You fixed it already? He said casually, looking at the stall. No one answered. No one moved. Because this was no longer hidden. Jack stepped forward, One step, then another, stopping just a few feet away. Their eyes met, and this time there was no doubt left. You did this, Jack said. A Páo tilted his head slightly. Do you have proof? The words were calm, confident, because he already knew the answer. Jack didn't reply immediately. He glanced back, at the child, at the villagers, at the people who knew, but might not speak, then forward again. I don't need proof to know the truth. A Páo smirked. That's not how things work. Silence tightened again.
Tử Tiên stepped up beside Jack.
Her presence steady, her voice clear. We know it was you. A Páo's eyes flickered toward her. And what are you going to do about it? That question hung there, challenging, provoking, waiting. Jack didn't answer. Not right away, because he understood something now. This wasn't just about damage. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about fear, about seeing if he would break. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step closer. His voice low, firm. You think this will make me leave? A Páo's smirk faded just slightly. Then you don't know me. The words landed differently this time, because they weren't angry. They were certain. The wind moved through the market again. Stronger, colder, carrying something new. Not fear, not doubt, but resistance. Behind Jack, someone stepped forward. Then another. Then another. The villagers. Not loud, not aggressive, but present. Standing, watching, choosing. And that changed everything. A Páo looked around, saw it, felt it. And for the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not defeat, but irritation. Because things were no longer going his way. TCH. He clicked his tongue, shook his head slightly, then got back on his bike. This isn't over, he said again. But this time it didn't sound like control. It sounded like a warning he wasn't fully sure he could carry out. The engine roared, and he left. Again. This time no one spoke, because they all knew. This wasn't finished. Not even close. Jack turned back to the stall, looked at the broken wood, the bruised fruit, then at Tử. She met his eyes. No words, but understanding. They didn't win. Not yet. But they didn't lose either. And sometimes, that's where the real fight begins.